This time it's the Tiger 100 story. The Triumph Tiger 100 was Triumph's sporting twin, being produced between 1939 and 1973. During its run, the machine was produced in a number of types and variations. But to learn the full story of the Tigers, we need to go back a little further. Because by 1935, Triumph was under new management. They brought in Valentine Page to design a completely new range of engines for them. He designed a range of modern singles with overhead valve dry sump engines, as well as the 6.1, a parallel twin of 650cc. No, the Speed Twin was not Triumph's first twin. However, in 1937, Edward Turner would arrive at the company, and he would essentially rebrand the single-cylinder range, retaining the more standard models, although he would use universal frames to cut costs, but he would also rebrand the more sporty models, adding chrome and silver paintwork, and calling them the Tigers, with the number after the name, 70, 80, 90, indicating the machine's, theoretical at least, top speed. And so the sporting 250 became the Tiger 70, the 350 the Tiger 80, and the 500 single the Tiger 90. He also deleted the 6.1 from the range. This was a machine essentially designed for sidecar hauling, to act as competition against the big side valve V-twins, which were very popular for that role at the time. But Turner, just as he'd done at Ariel, was determined to move Triumph's range in a more sporting direction. So nowhere would Turner turn to develop a range-topping model. Well, simply he developed a new twin-cylinder engine. He took the internals from Page's L21 and placed essentially two of them together on a common crankshaft to give 500 cc's. And this then was of course a 1938 Triumph Speed Twin. So why a 360 parallel twin? Some will tell you it's to do with carburation and better airflow. To be honest, this is a bit of old nonsense. But simply put, a parallel twin looks like a single, and singles were then seen as the bikes to have for a sporting rider. And unlike a V-twin, a parallel twin easily fits into the frame shared with a single cylinder unit. But the choice of a 360 crank made perfect sense at the time. Given the fairly solid flywheels at the bottom end, a 360 parallel twin runs very smooth at low RPM and doesn't get that lumpiness that you find in, say, a V-twin or in a 180 parallel twin. And from a practical point of view, the thing only needs one set of points. An important consideration when Joe Lucas is providing new electrical systems. So the real answer is it's simple and it's smooth. Vibration is very low on a parallel twin 500, especially in the early days because the engines simply weren't revving too high. But what of the Tiger 100? Well, that machine arrived in 1939 and followed Turner's usual path. He liked introducing a standard model, in this case the Speed Twin, and then following up a year or so later with a sporty model, in this case the Tiger 100, and as per the normal naming system, Tiger 100 indicates a 100 miles an hour claimed top speed. Turner's first Tiger 100 arrived in 1939. The engine was of 498 cc's, with of course a 360 crank and an overhead valve system. The bore and stroke was 63 by 80, just like the L21, and there was a 4-speed foot change gearbox. There was a single AML carburettor with girder forks at the front and a rigid rear end. Unlike the Speed Twin, there was a tank top instrument cluster, although the aeromath red of the Speed Twin's tank was replaced by a beautiful silver finish with blue lining on the Tiger 100. And a nice touch on these early bikes was the removable tail section of the exhaust, which left you with a megaphone for racing. But unfortunately for Triumph, by 1939 the war clouds were looming. But the machine still had some competition success, with Freddie Clark setting the all-time lap record of Brooklands on a very heavily modified Tiger 100 with an average speed of 118.02 miles an hour in 1939. And then of course came the war and the destruction of the Triumph factory in Coventry during the Blitz. 1946 would see the reintroduction of the Speed Twin, now with a 4-gallon tank which had originally been intended for the 1940 model, and of course the introduction of telescopic front forks, although the rear end remained unsprung. Now back during the war, Triumph had survived by producing a range of single-cylinder machines, overhead valve and side valve for the War Ministry, but they'd also built an auxiliary generator for the Air Ministry. This used a lightweight alloy version of the Triumph engine with parallel exhaust ducts and fan cooling. Post-war it was quickly realised that this engine provided a solution to the overheating problems that high-performance versions of the parallel twin had found, and so prototypes using what was essentially a modified version of the generator engine were prepared by Freddie Clark. He'd built the bike which had broken the lap record at Brooklands in 1939. And so with Ernie Lyons as rider, the machine was entered into and won the 1936 Manx Grand Prix. After this, a generator-based engine was used to power a number of machines that went into limited production, featuring in Grand Prix events as well as the International 6-day trials, where it powered the TR5s, essentially the off-road version of the Tiger 100. Despite the very different appearance of its all-alloy top end, the engine was essentially the same internally, having the same bore and stroke 63/80 as the Speed Twin and the earlier Tiger 100s. Power was around 40 horsepower for the Grand Prix bike and 25 horsepower for the ISDT machine. However, with its unique design, the engine was expensive to produce, and so was phased out in 1950 in favour of a race-kitted version of the Tiger 100 Roadster. This new version of the Tiger 100 would feature an aluminium head and barrel, just like the generator-based engine. And in 1951, it formed the basis of an all-new TR5 Trophy, essentially a new International 6-day machine. And with an all-up weight of just 304 pounds, the new Trophy would be highly successful once again at the ISDT, with the production version of the TR5 being one of the first dual-sport trail bikes. The machine featured a high exhaust, improved front suspension and the sprung hub available at the rear, as an option at least. But in trophy trim, the Tiger engine made just 25 horsepower. The Tiger Roadster, however, was rather more potent. In 1953, the machine was available as the Tiger 100C, essentially a purpose-built race version of the bike. 1954 would see the introduction of the swinging arm frame for the first time in the Tigers. And while this did make the ride more comfortable on those war-torn roads, on the demerit side it also added a fair bit of weight too. Although by this point, of course, the 650s were already entering the range, mainly to please the American market. Surprisingly, the 500s would remain more popular, simply because people couldn't see the point of the extra 150cc's, not on those twisty British roads at least. The 500 was smoother and more nimble, so why bother with the extra cc's, many thought. The 1950s was very much the golden era for the Tiger 100. The engine was developed year on year, and with fuel gradually improving, performance was able to increase too. And while the 650 sold well stateside, the smaller bike was still doing very well, thank you, in the United Kingdom. However, by the last part of the 50s, car sales were on the up in the United Kingdom, and motorcycle sales were consequently on the way down, and so a more cost-effective version of the Tiger 100 was required. And this would take the form of the first Tiger 100 unit construction model, the all-new T100A, in 1960. And this machine was very different. There was a version of the enclosed bodywork carried over from the 3TA model off which it was based, and of course the unit construction made the engine look more compact, although indeed lighter. But there were cost-cutting measures too. The move to battery-cooled ignition had been forced on the company, but was nevertheless cheaper than the old mag dyno setup, and the new engine's top end no longer featured an aluminium barrel. Instead it was cast iron all the way to the end of production. And of course there was a new points cover sticking out of the back of the cylinders. This looks rather like a distributor, but actually is just a set of points in there. On later machines this would of course move to the end of the camshaft, although the ghost of the thing could still be seen in the castings through to the end. On the road, engine performance remained good, although the frame was somewhat skimped, with the fuel tank unbelievably acting as a stressed member for an upper part of the frame, although on later models a metal brace would be added to do this job instead. The bulky bodywork is of course very practical, and was very popular for a while in the 1930s. This was not the first time it had come around, but it wasn't that popular with riders, who often binned it to give the machine a more sporty look. But the unitised engine was very different from its predecessor, sharing no common parts. The bore and stroke, for example, was now 69 by 65.5 to give 490cc's, and compression ratio for the Tiger was up around 9:1. And with the much better fuels now available, the engine could produce around 34 horsepower at 7,000 rpm. And with a light weight of just 337 pounds or 153 kilos, acceleration was pretty good, and top speed was within spitting distance of the magic ton mark. Although it is interesting to note that as time went by, the bike, as with so many bikes, did get a bit heavier, with the final 1969 models tipping the scales at just over 160 kilos. Although these final models are definitely some of the best, making use of improvements informed by the Daytona racing success, including an improved electrical system, better suspension and a beefed up bottom end, which had allowed the use of some of the performance upgrades carried over from the twin-carb Daytona, meaning that the final models kicked out around 38 horsepower, making the, as advertised if you like, 100 mph mark rather more attainable. But the problem for the Tiger 100 and all its derivations was that it was a smaller capacity bike, and wasn't really required in the US market, who much preferred the 650. In the UK, people really liked the 500, but the UK market had pretty much collapsed by the end of the 60s. But there were some interesting 60s variants. The Daytona is of course the best known, for its twin carbs gifting the bike around 40 horsepower and 105 miles an hour top speed. And although fast, the Daytona was not as smooth as the standard Tiger 100. So for many today, the standard single carb model probably makes the better choice, although the Daytona of course has the cachet value as a machine developed from wins at the Daytona 200 in 1966 and 1967. So expect to pay a premium. The Tiger 100 was always a very usable machine, and very adaptable too, and so was modified for a number of applications, including trials and other off-road pursuits, with Triumph's final version of the Works TR5 being developed into the Adventure of the early 70s. But by then the Tiger 100 was very long in the tooth and was desperately in need of a replacement, but none came. And when production stopped in 73-74 for the factory sit-in, the 500 did not emerge afterwards, save a few machines assembled from parts left over. What other bikes or collections of bikes would you like to see us feature? Maybe you got a bike we can use for a test ride. Either way, get in touch below. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course thank you very much for watching.